Welcome to the Being Known podcast with my friend, Dr. Curtis Ring Thompson.
Oh my God. You did that. You revealed my middle name. And my friend, the most beautiful man in the world, Pepper Sweeney. Dude, people were swooning over
We are
you
here
in
to discover
El Salvador.
and explore. We are here to discover and explore what it means to be truly known.
Right.
And
I've come to truly know you.
I think that we
you are like
listen,
you are Dr. Swoon. That's what people are going to call you. That's what people are calling you.
Listen. I think it's important
okay,
for
five
you to
times.
be
Okay,
known.
I'm waiting.
Yes. And I happen to love the ring of your middle name. Just when they're all strung together.
Okay.
Curtis
Okay.
Ring Thompson, MD. I mean, that's a happening moniker right there. That is a happening moniker. How are you, buddy?
Oh man, I was better about 3 minutes ago.
Well, I do what I can. Somebody's got to bring you down to earth. Life can't be all just
ring-a-ling, ding-a-ling,
exactly.
All the things.
Exactly.
All the things that my middle school childhood memories are now bringing back into the studio.
Yes. For a reminder, we are in the midst of season 8 of the Being Known podcast, and we are putting ourselves in the path of oncoming beauty. And today we're going to be talking about the sense of beauty. And I'm excited to talk about it. Hopefully this week you've spent some time looking at some of the works of Frank Lloyd Wright, because we're going to talk about that towards the end of the episode, especially Falling Waters. If you haven't, don't worry. You'll still have time to be able to do that afterwards. So
yeah,
let's dig in, Kurt.
Yeah. So I I think that just as a reminder to our listeners, we have talked about this notion for over the course of the time that we've been doing this podcast. This notion of what does it mean for us to put ourselves in the path of oncoming beauty, and we've kind of come at it in some ways that are maybe direct, but not quite as deep as we really want to plow into in this particular season. And it's funny, Pep. I mean, we're gonna over the course of this season, we're going to be talking about the work of Compassion International, and this notion of paying attention to beauty and watching beauty emerge in the hardest places of our lives was really brought home to us, to me, to you, to us in the trip that we talked about, that we will talk about. And I just want to remind our listeners that we don't want this season to be some abstract thing.
Right.
We really want this to, as we say, this notion of being known really does focus his attention. God is focusing his attention. The knowing of us, our being known by others, really is about the discovery of beauty. But our trauma and our wounds so effectively keep us from paying attention to it, or even thinking about paying attention to it, that we miss. And so we end up thinking that beauty is just, it's just an accessory. It's a luxury. It's not something that's actually necessary for us to flourish. But we'll come to discover in today's episode that beauty begins with our very entrance into the world, and why we're talking today about this notion of beauty and connecting it to what we call the vertical integration domain when it comes to interpersonal neurobiology. And by vertical, we're talking about the body and the place of the body as our means of encounter in the world. And at some level, like, this can all just be rather obvious, right? Yeah, okay, we've got bodies and we encounter the world, the material world. I'm looking at the oak tree outside, the car that we drive, the cold that we get, the injury to Joe Burrow's calf that, we're all praying for.
Yes.
The Chiefs aren't
harder
praying
than others, right?
The Chiefs aren't praying for that, because they know what, if he gets well, they know what's coming.
Yes.
The Chiefs know what's coming. For all our Chief fans out there, we love you. We just love the Bengals more.
We do. We do. I appreciate that.
Yeah. But this notion that our bodies are always in this rhythmic dance with the material world, this notion that so one of the ways that we talk about how we are always perceiving things in the world. Like I perceive like a glass of water. If I see the glass of water sitting on my counter, I perceive it. And it's of course obvious that there's a glass of water there. And, I just want to walk over and get my glass of water. I don't want to have some conversation about the neuroscience of what my brain is doing, what my body is doing to have an encounter. But interestingly enough, when I look at an object, a glass of water or a painting or whatever it is, it's true that I'm looking at that object, but it's equally true that what's really happening as far as my brain is concerned is I think, I'm looking at Frank Lloyd Wright's Falling Water. I'm looking at one of those rooms in that house that's just unbelievable.
Yeah.
But what's really happening is my brain doesn't see a room in the house. My brain is only seeing my eyes. The light comes to the back of the eye, the retina, and it runs into the brain. And then the brain has to manufacture my perception of this room that I'm looking at. My brain has to manufacture the perception of the person I'm speaking with. My brain has to manufacture a perception of myself. But that embodied experience is something that when my brain is kind of like with all those 100 billion neurons is constructing that object, what it's doing is also then giving me the opportunity to have an encounter with that object. So the reason that I know that the glass of water is really there is because I walk over and pick it up. I've taken care of patients who see things that aren't there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what is that? Well, that's their brain constructing things that they perceive to be in the world that don't actually exist in the world. But when we pick up the glass of water, we have a high correlation, extraordinarily high correlation. So much so that, when we pick things up, we say, oh, that's real because it's really there. I don't imagine that my brain is making these things up. But this is really important because when it comes to our stories and when it comes to the sense that we make of our stories, we first have to recognize that my body is the first thing to encounter the world. When my eye sees the glass of water, it's my body that is taking this in long before I even think that I have the thought, oh, that's a glass of water sitting on the counter. Of course, that's true. But before I'm thinking it in brain terms, my body is having a sensory experience of it. And the reason that this is important is because we often pay so little attention to what my body is doing, and I'm so locked into my thinking brain that when it comes to all the things in my life, the things that I love, but the things that have wounded me, I think about them a lot. I don't pay that much attention to how is my body encountering this to begin with. I'm not really paying attention to this notion that the body operates the brain, the central nervous system, bottom to top and right to left, as we've said here on our show so many times. This notion that my spinal cord collects senses, it runs north up the spinal cord into the right side of the brain. From the right, it runs to the left side of the brain where I then tend to make sense. I'm starting to think and analyze those things. I'm perceiving what I'm sensing, and then I'm going to tell a story. I'm going to make sense of this. I recently told folks that I've made a list of people that I have to forgive.
Okay. Go ahead. Am I on the top of that list?
You actually occupy several spots on that list.
Nice.
I have 10 people, and you
occupy
11 of the 10 spots.
Yes.
I've got 11 different events.
Right. So you've made a list of people that you've made a list of people that you need to forgive.
I made a list, and here's the thing: because I've had real encounters with people, real embodied encounters. But then what happens? I have an encounter that might have happened a year ago, or 2 years, or 10 years, 20 years ago. But then what do? I continue to tell a story, about that. And I think it's easy for me to perceive that it's the thing that happened to me that is the problem. When in fact, I am my problem.
Right.
I'm the one who's telling a story about what they think about me, about what I think that they think, all the things. And so I'm not really paying that much attention to the fact that, like, oh, my body had a particular experience. And now I'm telling a story about it over and over. And that story that I tell reinforces the physical felt sense of what happened the very first time it happens, as opposed to, well, wait a minute. What is Jesus saying to me about telling a different story about the thing that I'm encountering in my body? And this is a reminder of this notion of what happens when we read Genesis 1, that God comes out of and creates order and purpose out of chaos in the second sentence of the Bible, and that he brings beauty to the material world. That's the intention. And it's not just the beauty of the thing that I see, but it's also its purpose. There's beauty in our purpose. And this is where our trauma really wreaks havoc with us, because it's not just that somebody sexually abused me. It's not just that I was mistreated in the church. It's not just that I had this event happen at work. Those things are true, but then it fractures my sense of purpose.
Right. Can we talk for a minute? If I know we have a lot we want to cover, but I would love to talk for a minute about this list of people that you want to forgive. I'm being serious. This isn't a joke.
Okay.
I know that's sometimes hard to tell. So what is your intention with that list?
Yeah.
And is this something like a 12-step where you're going to go and talk to these people, or is this something you're going to do internal, solely internal work? And then what outcome are you looking for?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, so there are. Let me first say that I don't have an intention of going to talk with them.
Okay.
That's, I mean, in some respects, because most of these folks I don't have a lot of interaction with. Some of these folks are not even alive.
Right.
But what I am doing is literally in my mind, and this is where we perceive things. We think, oh, it's just in my mind, because if it's in my mind, then it's not in my body.
Right.
And this is really what we're getting back to, that like, if it's in your mind, it is in your body, because your brain is doing the work.
Yeah.
And so I'm having a picture in my mind of the encounter that I had. And then I'm moving to my kitchen table, where I am sitting with this person and with Jesus, and I'm listening to Jesus talk to me as he talks with me and with this person. And I'm listening to Jesus talk to me and be curious with me about what's the story that you've told? Tell me about the story that you've told, that you believe this person is essentially told and is telling about you. And I tell him. And he's like, well, let's look at that. And then he said, like, how does that compare to the story that I would like for you to hear that I'm telling about you? And they're like, okay. Oh, this is where things get tricky. Because I recognize that even though these events might have happened a year or 2 or 20 years ago, they land on a remembered, embodied experience of what it was like for me when I was 4 and 10 and 16. This didn't just begin with these particular events. This is a story. These events are just examples of a story I've been telling myself my entire life. And so the whole process of emerging beauty starts to come with me retelling a story, with letting Jesus be the storyteller. And what I find is that the way I am aware, and this has already begun to happen, I sense, like, literally, I have a relief in the center of my chest.
That's beautiful.
And I'm aware of it, and I'm aware that, like, you know, as I've reflected on this, I'm becoming aware, like, oh my gosh, like, I've enjoyed holding a grudge against some of these folks. Like, I've enjoyed it. I don't think about it that often, but when I do, like, I enjoy thinking about the event and then imagining myself being really angry and, you know, whatever I'm going to do.
Yes.
And, like, wow. So I reinforce, like, I entangle my hurt and my shame with the pleasure of hurting them, of doing violence to them in my mind. But I don't just do it. It's not just an independent, like, I feel the violence in my body. And my body's encounter with this is, like, where it actually happens. That's where it gets reinforced. That's where, like, oh, okay, I like that feeling. I'm just going to, like, put that back in the room, and I'm going to go back and find that a little, you know, like, in a few weeks.
Right.
When I'm feeling really upset about myself, not very good about myself, I'll go back and think about what that person said or did or didn't say, and so forth and so on. And I'm going to enjoy, you know, being angry or whatever. Right. Remembering that, oh, this is taking place in the context of my physically experienced remembrance of this. And it's happening in isolation. I'm doing it by myself. I don't invite you over. I don't call you up and say, "Hey, Pep, I want to just go have a 5-minute fantasy about really being mad for this person, and I want to. Right. Could you join me with this and like help support my anger and my grudge that I'm holding?"
Right.
No, I'm by myself, which is what enables me to hold the grudge, which is what enables me to remain in this place of chaos. Right, that's not Genesis 1. Genesis 1 is God coming to chaos and giving order and purpose. And but these experiences of mine are chaotic. Like, they're not fun. They weren't fun when they happened. And God is coming just like he did in Genesis 1 and hovering and then creating purpose and order. But he does so because I'm saying, like, I have to say this to you. I have to say this to Phil. Like, my wife, Phyllis, has really been helpful for me in helping reframe, like reimagining what these stories are really about. So I can't do this by myself. I don't forgive people by myself. I mean, I actually have to do that work, but I can't do it by myself. I need help. And I need help. Again, it's not some abstract function in my head. I have to do it by practicing something that actually I feel in my body when I know that it's changing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing.
So we're moving.
That's helpful. Yeah.
Yeah. And so this is, and so it's also the work of, like, it's not so forgiveness in this sense is not a thing that I do. It's a thing I'm becoming.
Yeah.
I'm becoming living, breathing forgiveness, like that. So when Jesus says to Peter, no, it's actually not 7 times, it's 70 times 7, which is hyperbole, right? He's just like, that's not the point. We're not keeping track of numbers.
Yeah. Forgive without
who are
ceasing.
you becoming?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And I'm lighter. Like I'm less like, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm different. And I'm aware too that, like, sometimes I think, oh, if I forgive that person, I've done it, and then it won't bother me anymore. But I'm only ever a stair step away from, like, returning to that old story, that old path. Like you can re-enter the path of enjoying being angry at people.
Sure.
So it's not just a thing that I do; it's the choice to continually become something different, but that is never separate from my embodied experience of it, my material experience of the world. And so I imagine these people in my mind, one person at a time, and I'm imagining being with them at the table, and I'm imagining smiling at them, like literally, like practicing. Like, if you were to walk in on me, you think like, dude, like, what are you doing? And I'm like, oh, I'm practicing. I'm smiling. I'm smiling at the person that I'm mad at.
Right.
Like, there's nobody else in the room. Like, are you that guy that right now is seeing things that aren't here?
Right.
Yeah. Because when we, so this notion of Genesis 1 being out of chaos comes order and purpose and beauty. And then Genesis 2, this notion that it happens with a certain sequence, right? He goes from separating from chaos, light and darkness, and then he separates the water in the dry land. And in the dry land, you've got this wilderness, and then he plants a garden in the wilderness, and then water springs up even in this dry land that waters the garden, and it makes mud. And there is a sequence of creation that God begins making us with our bodies. He begins with mud. He formed the man out of the dust of the earth, out of the mud of the earth. And then he breathes life. And there is this sequence. And so whenever we are thinking about beauty, there's a sequence about, like, what is the material realm that I'm encountering? And what are the material realms that I can, as we're going to talk about here in just a few minutes, what are the material realms that I can talk about that enable me to imagine beauty and that enable me to sense beauty, even in my body, long before I'm thinking about it, in brain time. We are mud, and then we are breath. And then this goes back and forth in my breath, my life, my thinking, my sense. All these things that I'm doing with my thought processes are affecting the mud. They're affecting the body. And if I'm not careful and my trauma gets a hold of me, that trauma then shatters my capacity even to pay attention to the mud very effectively. So I can perceive beauty in my mind, but even that requires my brain activity. It was said that Einstein, before he came up with the math, he saw the world, he saw his physics in pictures. And those pictures are three-dimensional structures in his mind that, of course, like, yeah, they're not out in the room, but they're in his mind that require the activity of his neural networks. It's an embodied, imagined moment that he then incarnates, because then he starts talking about math, which we think, oh, that's just abstract. But then when you start talking about how we've discovered that space is actually a voluminous thing that shifts in and of itself, that's just this amazing thing that, like, math actually, as it turns out, isn't just math.
Right.
It's always correlating to the material universe. And so our imagination, as we've said here before, that we are continually moving, God continually moves more and more from the imagination to the incarnation, from imagination to the incarnate, and in Jesus, and then in us. And then we become these conveyors of beauty.
So would you say that this work that you're doing for forgiveness, I'm sorry, I keep going back to that, but this work that you're going for forgiveness is sort of the imagination going to the incarnate, right? Yeah, that's the example of it, because you're doing imagination work.
Right.
And
right. Totally.
And in order to, I mean, you have this, say it's a trauma that you're needing to forgive, this trauma that's in your body, and it's stopping you from seeing beauty to a certain extent.
Right. In that person. That person.
And maybe not even in that person. It could be, look, I speak for myself. As you're talking about these people you need to forgive, things are coming up in me that I'm thinking, yeah, there's some people that I need there. One particular person comes right to the top of my, and
you're looking at it.
No, not at all. So I have work to do, but I think that because I haven't fully done that work yet, I think that can fog up a lot of things.
Totally.
Right? So doing this imagination work gets us to the incarnate, which allows us to see beauty in a better way.
Totally.
Yeah? And then allows that beauty to affect us in a better way. Right?
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. Like, I'm thinking, even right now, I'm thinking of one of these folks.
Yeah.
And I'm aware that, like, some of these folks I will have encounters with in the near future. And, like, I can put on a good show. I mean, I can, whatever. But I don't want to do that.
Right.
Like, I don't want to be working to keep what my grudge in the mudroom while I'm welcoming them into my foyer.
It's always so interesting to me, the person that's holding on to this, like you in this case, holding on to this, and the pain that it's causing you, while this other person's just out here willy-nilly, free and happy. Right. And has no idea of any of this stuff that you're going through, and you keep telling yourself this story over and over again.
I know.
You're the one that's hurting from it.
I know. Right. How dare they enjoy life? That idiot.
I think we've gone off the rails a little bit.
Well, but I mean, in some respects, it's just like, okay, so if we were to say, Curt, even if we weren't talking about this, and you were to say, I want to put you in front of the irises.
Yeah,
I say that because, like, I know that you love that painting. I love the painting because you love the painting. I mean, because you introduced me to it, and you think, okay, now I want you to bring to mind any of those 10 folks, right? 4 of them are family members of mine, all of whom are deceased. And I mean, these are not people with whom I'm waging mortal combat, but but things have happened that have hurt my feelings, and I have nursed that.
Yep.
Oftentimes without even knowing it. And if I sit with the irises and say, like, well, let's bring your brother in, or let's bring your mom or your dad into the room. And let's have them sit right next to you. And let's have them look at it with you. And then at some point, like, ask them what they think about it. Ask them what they're sensing. Notice what's happening to them. It's really difficult for us to allow ourselves to be in the presence of beauty and hold a grudge. If I'm willing, because things are happening, like literally because the beauty starts to speak to me. It's difficult, and beauty, for instance, it's, we know these stories all the time, like where it's hard for us to maintain our harshness with someone who is just continually kind to us. It makes it maybe more harsh for a short period of time because I can't stand the fact that you're being kind to me when I'm so pissed off.
Right.
But you know what I mean? Like and so we have these wounds that we carry literally in our bodies, such that if we're willing over time to encounter beauty, we allow the imagined thing that I long for. Like I long to live a life of being living, breathing, pulsating forgiveness. But right now, like I got miles to travel before I'm becoming that. But encountering beauty, encountering these things in your imagination eventually allows it to become incarnate. And so we have this world that we encounter where beauty exists, nature, all the things that are there in the world. And there's also the beauty that we then create, which we're going to get to in just a moment with Frank Lloyd Wright, this sense that we are creating things that we are perceiving in the world that inspire us to do things that our imaginations allow us to do. And I think about this notion, we go back to these 4 W's that, beauty is, it's wonder, it is welcome, it is worship, and it's work. If we want, if you look at Falling Waters and you're like, yeah, somebody had to work to construct that. Somebody had to work. Frank Lloyd Wright had to work to imagine it.
Yeah.
And to imagine a thing that actually could exist in the world. I suppose we can imagine all kinds of things if we wanted to that aren't actually going to be able to exist in the material world. And then these 3 R's of this notion of, first, we're just going to be revealing things. Like, so to forgive means something has to be revealed. Oh, there's this part of me that is holding on to that in a way that I don't really want to give up. It's revealing. But that will then have to be regenerated, not have to be healed, in order for me then to go on and be recommissioned. And to recommission me, I'm going to recommission the relationship. Even if I don't have contact with those folks, some I won't, that relationship is going to be regenerated. It's going to be recommissioned in order for it to become something beautiful in and of itself that heretofore I could never have imagined it to be. But I have to pay attention to what's happening in my body in order for that to take place. And so therefore we say, we like to say that healing is a disruptive technology. This process of encounter, we love, like I'm going to go to the museum and I'm going to go to the East Wing at the Smithsonian. I'm going to see Rothko. Yeah. And I'm going to revel, and I'm just going to sit and be, and there's a sense in which beauty overwhelms us. Beauty creates all kinds of things that are wonderful for us. But beauty also, if you really want to encounter it, if you're going to take the hike into the Grand Canyon, if you're going to go down and back in a day, you're going to pay for it. It's going to require things of you. It's going to cost you something. You will encounter beauty like you've never encountered it before, but it's going to cost you something. And we look at the wound of Genesis 2, where God separates the man, right? He falls into a deep sleep. And there's a wound. He wakes up and there's something's happened to him. But his response is poetry and song. Because the intention of that wound, like the intention of the wound of a parent who says no to a child. The child doesn't like it when the parent says no. It's a wound to the child. It's an insult. But the parent is saying no as a way to draw the child into integration, draw the child into wholeness. When we get to Genesis 3, the intention is completely different. The wound of the serpent with the conversation with the woman is intended to disintegrate. There's a distress that she starts to feel in her body. Adam in Genesis 2 wakes up like, yeah, he's got the gaping chest wound, and something is brought to him that is blowing his mind as a result of this. And so even the act of entering into healing is not unlike what God is doing in Genesis 2 with Adam, what we are doing with each other. And so we encounter each other, we encounter the beauty of each other by imagining the way that I am containing my wounds in my body. Those wounds are not to simply be talked about as an abstract thing. I have to pay attention to what I'm sensing and imaging and feeling. And where it is in the imagination yet, I want to move it continually into this place of the incarnate. And there is this thin line between creating and encountering beauty for the purpose of integration and wholeness and the purpose of devouring. And we see that in our own bodies, but we also see this in the physical world. It's often said, I mean, I'm not an architect nor a student of architecture, but it doesn't take much to look at, and what has been talked about in many respects as the architecture of communist Eastern Europe.
Yeah.
And how the architecture itself reflected the souls of those who were so broken at the time.
Yeah.
And then, by comparison, we have Frank Lloyd Wright.
Yeah, I think I started really noticing architecture in my 20s, like as a form of beauty and as something I was attracted to. I remember taking a tour of the Gamble House in Pasadena, which is, I think it's on Orange Street, and it's like Millionaires Row, I think it was back, and back in the day, these Gamble of Procter and Gamble built their summer house out on this, and it was designed by an architecture firm of Green and Green. It was this arts and crafts style, a lot of mission style furniture, arts and crafts style architecture, and going in and having the opportunity to immerse myself in that house. And one room, I remember they had a rookwood vase. Rookwood pottery is a pretty world-renowned pottery out of Cincinnati, actually. And since Gamble was based here, they took this vase and they designed the whole room around this vase, and it was unbelievable. The stained glass came, the whole everything was centered around this vase. And so the idea of aesthetics being that important.
Wow.
Obviously they had to have the means to do this kind of thing. But it just really kind of perked my interest. And I really fell in love with that sort of arts and crafts style, which lent itself a bit to, Frank Lloyd Wright style. A lot of his stuff is very arts and crafts in its base, the Prairie School movement, the lines that he has in a lot of his buildings, and a lot of the furniture, the way it's built, is reminiscent and similar in style. So Falling Waters, in particular, what we're talking about today, which hopefully you all have had a chance to go and at least see some images of. It's very easy to find. Just Google Falling Waters and stuff will start coming up. It was built in 1935. It was commissioned by Edgar Kaufman. Edgar Kaufman owned a department store in Pittsburgh.
The Kaufman's department store.
Kaufman's department store, right?
Yeah.
And, did very well. And he loved the outdoors, and he found this piece of property about 40 miles southeast of Pittsburgh, that he built had a cabin built there. And there was a creek that ran through with this beautiful waterfall. And he decided the cabin was kind of getting run down, and he decided that he wanted to build something on a more grand scale that he can invite people to and have this place. And so he turned to Frank Lloyd Wright to design this house. And so Frank Lloyd Wright comes and he surveys the property. And Kaufman's whole idea was, I want a house with a view of the waterfall. And Frank Lloyd Wright's idea was, I want a house on top of the waterfall that becomes a part of the waterfall, that becomes a part of nature, and the waterfall comes out of. And Kaufman wasn't in the beginning happy about this idea at all. He didn't, it just wasn't what he had envisioned.
Yeah.
And so Frank Lloyd Wright is set to design. He finally agrees, and he's going to design it. Kaufman's calling, saying, "How's it going? How's it going?" And Frank Lloyd Wright's like, "I'm almost there. It's beautiful. I'm so excited about it." He's lying through his teeth. He hasn't done a bit of work yet because he's feeling no inspiration. After he goes and he sees the land, he's just not inspired to do it. So 9 months goes by, and at this point, Kaufman thinks the plans are done because Frank Lloyd Wright has told him that they are. Which reminds me, I had this 1966 Porsche. It was like unbelievable, and I had a little accident, and the auto body shop I took it to had it for like a month, and it was a small little thing. And I called the guy, and he's like, "Yeah, we're almost done. I'm sorry, it's almost done." And I happened to be taking a walk past his thing, and it was still sitting there untouched. So I was like, just tell me the truth. So why Wright wouldn't fess up anyway? So Kaufman,
okay, but wait. I'm going to interrupt you for just a second.
Yeah.
Like, isn't this what we do with ourselves? We have this longing.
Yeah.
Kaufman has this longing.
Yeah.
To be something, for something to be created. We win our lives to be something.
Yeah.
And then there's a part of us that longs to do the right thing, but like we're not inspired because our traumas keep us like there's these things, and then we like make stuff up. Yeah, I'm fine. No, it's going very well.
It is.
Yeah, the design is coming along just nicely.
It is.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
9 months in, Kaufman is 2 hours away from Frank Lloyd Wright at a business meeting. And he calls him and says, "I'm going to be there in 2 hours to see the plans." So Frank Lloyd Wright goes into this procrastinated, inspired genius and draws the plans out in 2 hours for Falling Waters. 2 hours. It just pours out of him.
Boom.
And they're the initial plans for this beautiful, so he comes and he sees them, and they struggled all through the construction process. He didn't think that he brought in engineers at one point to question Frank Lloyd Wright's ability to do these cantilevers, and that they're going to, and all this. It didn't pass the engineer's muster, and Frank Lloyd Wright was like, "I don't care. I'm doing it this way." That letter from the engineers is in the concrete in the building now, and he just went ahead and did what he wanted. Although we found out years later that the constructions team was putting in a lot more steel to help reinforce everything than Wright had wanted in the first place. So it's really interesting. It's this cantilever building. I happen to, so my love for architecture that peaked when, not peaked, but I bought a condominium in California, and it was built by a student of Frank Lloyd Wright's by the name of Ray Cappy, who was famous in his own right for these cantilevered dwellings that come out of like the hills. So I was in the Hollywood Hills, and when it would rain, water would be cascading. First of all, the roof was flat, which Wright was notorious for, having these flat roofs, and sometimes, although he talks about form and function going together, sometimes living in these dwellings is not the best. But we used to call it Falling Waters because the way the rain would cascade off of all these cantilevers.
Totally.
And so I found it really interesting that the estimated cost for building this was $35,000. We're talking about 1936, so that's and then the final cost of everything with the guest house was $155,000, which included $22,000 for the finishings and furnishings and $50,000 for the guest house. So it was a total cost of $155,000 to build this whole thing. And then they did a $3.3 million restoration in 2020. The Smithsonian calls this one of the, I think, 25 places to see in your lifetime, which I am going to go. My son's now living in Pennsylvania. I'm making a point to go. It's something that I have to see. I have to immerse myself in.
Yeah. Dude, so I live less than 2 hours from this place, and I've lived here for 30 years and have not been to see this.
I,
And
you know,
it's my goal to go
and you can
to
go
see this.
tour it, and if you can't, if you don't have the means and you're not 2 hours away from it, there are, if you go to Falling Water, Frank Lloyd Wright's foundation, there are amazing photographs and great stories, not just about Falling Water, but all of his architecture and
Hmm.
all of his
Hmm.
houses. He was very
Hmm.
influenced by Japanese buildings and Japanese culture. You
Hmm.
can see that, especially in Falling Water. He got
Hmm.
into some the other forms with Aztec design
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
and then the
Hmm.
curves of all the different things that he did. But
Right.
this particular brand of his architecture, this period, was absolutely my favorite. And so that's a question that I have for you, and I know we have to wrap up here, but there are structures that I'm very attracted to. There are
Hmm.
design and structure that my mind wants more of. And
Hmm.
then there are others that, I don't know if repulsed is the right word, but I'm not, I don't really want. And so,
Right.
it feels like that's an inherent thing in me. I
Hmm.
don't know whether
Hmm.
that's just personal to me or whether that's
Hmm.
universal. And
Hmm.
so the first
Hmm.
question is that universal? And the
Hmm.
second question is, what is that? What is that that's happening?
Yeah. Well, I think it's true in many respects. Like we're drawn to certain things fairly constitutionally. Like what what color are you drawn to? What kind of shape are you drawn to? What's a whole range of different ways in which we have a natural affinity for certain things. In the same way that we have a natural affinity to be drawn to certain things about our own stories.
Mhm.
And then we have other parts of our stories. We have other architectural designs
Structures. Yeah.
that we would say, oh, I'm not naturally drawn to that. And even some of these over here, I would say are really off putting.
Hmm.
And I would say, in those, one of the things that has I've had to learn over the years is that it's one thing to encounter a piece of art, or in this case, an architectural piece, and you might say, "Oh, I'm really drawn to that," or "I'm really not drawn to that." But if you were to say, "Oh, well, tell me about the architect. What's the architect thinking and feeling? Like, what else is going on with this physical representation? What else is going on?" In the same way that there will be things that I experience in my own body that represent like the grudges that I hold. And I might say, I'm not really, well, maybe I am a little drawn, maybe I'm not really drawn to that, whatever. But like, tell me the story that's behind that. And my being able to hear more of the story about what's going on. So like this story between Kaufman and Wright, like
Right.
it's just so compelling. And
Right.
so like how does a guy in 2 hours come up with that? And, well, kind of like, well, how does a guy study for an exam when he's just procrastinating? But then you do things, you find ways to do things.
Hmm.
But the point being that there are things that we are naturally drawn to, things that we're like less naturally drawn to. We might even find that we're like kind of off put by it. But like many things in our embodied experience, the question is, am I willing to simply be present with it and observe it long enough for me to begin to appreciate it, long enough for me to become aware that, oh, this feeling that I have when I'm with this particular piece of architecture that I don't like, what is it like for me to just simply, instead of just, well, therefore I'm not going to look at it anymore, I'm not going to go visit that. What is it
Yeah.
like for me to sit with it?
It
Yes.
just reminds me, Guy de Maupassant, yeah, he hated the Eiffel Tower so much he couldn't look at it. Where he had lunch every single day was in the Eiffel Tower, so he didn't have to look at it when he was having his lunch.
Yeah. 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 Yeah, and I think for our listeners, here's the thing. We're not trying to force a square peg into a round hole. We're not trying to say we're not trying to like, oh, we're going to magically have a conversation about architecture and see what this has to do with the mind and our trauma and our healing. Like we're gonna like making stuff up. No, we're really saying that Wright's architectural designs and not just as a fact, but our encounter with it
Yep.
is a powerful reminder that our encounter with ourselves and with each other and with the world that God is asking us to live in is first and foremost one of great physicality.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a physicality that God finds to be precious. And we can be reminded of that preciousness and of that beauty by encountering those kinds of material world acts of beauty ourselves, like in falling water.
Yeah.
And to the degree that we practice that, we begin to allow the incarnate to fire our imagination,
Mm-hmm.
to sense a different incarnate experience ourselves of our own story. It's not magic, it's practice. And it's done in the presence of others who do this alongside us.
Indeed. Indeed. All right. That was fun.
Yeah, right
So
on.
I do want to say that next week we will be featuring as what we're talking about as far as the artistic portion of the program is Dave Brubeck's Take 5. Now listen, don't be scared. I know jazz can be a little bit intimidating to people. I think that this song was selected thinking about that in particular.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I will say that I have taken a couple of walks this week where I've had my earbuds in,
Mm-hmm.
and played this song repeatedly and had this sort of multi-sensory experience with the music and the environment that I'm in and my thoughts and letting my mind do things. And it's been a beautiful practice to do this week. I encourage you to try that or something like it. At the very least, give it a listen, more than one, give it a couple of shots, and we'll talk about it next week.
Right on.
All right, Curt. I
love you, man.
Yeah.
All right.
For those of you watching on YouTube, stick around because producer Amy's going to be joining us.
Producer Amy is in the house.
Yes.
She is.
Hi, guys.
Produce, baby, produce.
Hey.
Okay, I think I start every post show with, oh my gosh. I'm going to dive in because there's so much. There's so much. Starting with forgiveness. Like that, I didn't see that in the notes. It might have been there. But...
No, it wasn't.
But it's okay. So, Curt, as you were talking, not Kurt Ring. Good one. As you were talking, like it feels really good to hold on to the anger, right? It feels really, there's a lot about that. And then I thought, but there is, and when you said that, that felt really heavy. It didn't feel life-giving. But I thought, okay, there is a time for anger if somebody harms us. So then it's like, for me, it's the difference between anger and grudge. Like, okay, there's a time for anger. Then if we do the work like you're doing, Curt, Pep and I might have a little bit of work to do. Then it's like, okay, that is letting go of not letting go, working through the grudge. That is life-giving. It's all, and then when you said you're sitting at the table with the other person that harmed you and Jesus, and you are mindful of the story that you think that person is telling about you. And then lining that up, putting that next to the story that Jesus is telling us. Now it's hard to let go of this story, but that is the life. If we
right. Well, and it's hard to let go because there's the part of me that's like, well, if I let go, I mean, one of the things that holding onto the story does is that it keeps me alert. It helps focus my attention. It helps me pay attention to like, when is anything like this going to come back around and tag me again? Like it's protective in that sense. It's keeping me alert to that.
Right.
Instead of, but it's also energy I got to burn to maintain it, to hold it. And I continue to maintain the story that I'm telling, not just about the other person, but primarily about me.
Right.
And that's not the story that Jesus is telling. So I have to give that up. And that's hard to do. It's really hard to do. And I hear Jesus acknowledging, yep, this is hard to do. You have to decide if that's the life you want to live.
Right.
Or if you want to live with freedom.
Right. And like to your point, Pep, when you were saying, okay, that takes, we only have so much energy. So if we're spending it on that, then it's not this cut and dry, but then we have less energy to focus on beauty and see the goodness. Yeah. So then to Frank Lloyd Wright, and I thought, okay, he's telling stories. He's like when the engineer said, no, we need a little more metal, and he's like, no, we don't, because I can't really be bothered by that. He has to be telling a story and able to make that decision.
Totally.
And okay, so he was criticized for a number of things, like, as you said, Pep, the roofs are flat. That is not super conducive to, like, there are leaks and structural issues. And he was criticized for, like, not paying attention to the function, the fact that it's a functional piece of art. Like, someone's going to live in it. People are going to be in it. And he didn't want to be bothered by costs. Like, I was reading one article that concrete, he was like, concrete for, right, Pep? Like, the concrete for the foundation is really pricey. And so we could cut back on that. I'm like, I don't want to live in a house where somebody cut back. Were you going to say something, Pep?
They did have to come in and do a $3.3 million, where they had to skewer everything up again and all that kind of stuff. Now, I will say something that's interesting about the form over function thing is when he thought about designing a room, he thought about what was going to be happening in that room. Like, what is this room for? What are they going to do in this room? And he designed it around that. So that part of it, the experiential part of it, of function, he thought of. But the roof might leak, and
Okay, can I pause for a second? Pause for a second and just say, this really sparks in me this sense of our asking in our physicality, what role is this going to play? What role is my presence? Like the presence of, what role is the tone of voice that I offer to the room? What role does my gaze play? What role does my body language play? What role does my timing and tempo of my responses play? How am I in my very presence an agent of the creation of beauty in the room, just by coming into it? And not by all the standard trappings of how we judge beauty because of what we see on the cover of Vogue or GQ, but the whole notion that my very presence is facilitating the emergence of love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control, all the rest. That, like, that whole that gable house, Pep, that you were talking about, where you have one piece in the center, and out of that piece comes all these other things. And for us to imagine that we are that object, that when we come into the room, the room is then going to have the opportunity to reflect that kind of beauty because of what we ourselves are bringing into the room. Long before we have offered all of our wit and our wisdom and our humor and our intelligence and all the things that we think, that I'm working so hard to offer to people to make sure that they think that I'm smart enough and this enough and that enough and so forth. I'm just bringing myself. And it's difficult for us to do that if I am not allowing myself to be loved, if I am burning so much energy holding my grudges, I'm burning energy doing that, I'm not going to be curious about, how will I be an object that facilitates the emergence of beauty in the room when I enter it?
Yeah. You say anything to Curt and he could turn it into gold.
We just come up with some things to put on the table, and then
exactly.
Mr. Magic over there, poof, brings the, what is it, fairy dust or whatever.
I'm a neuro fairy.
Neuro fairy.
Okay.
Add that to your resume.
It's a t-shirt.
All right, so take 5 next week. That's a t-shirt. Yes, that's it.
I'm a neuro fairy.
I'll wear a shirt that says neuro on it, no matter what it says.
Yes. Take 5 next week.
All right.
All right, guys.
All right, guys.
Bye.
See ya.
This podcast is produced by Curt Thompson, Pepper Sweeney, and myself, Amy Chella. Audio production and editing is by Keaton Simons. Video production and editing is done by Mark Gould. If you'd like to connect with us, you can find us on social media at Being Known Pod. If you like this podcast, tell a friend. If you love this podcast, tell everyone you know. And please like, rate, and review wherever you listen. Be well, be known.